evening to everybody. I trust that you all are safe and well, and that you are appreciating this opportunity of rest. Yeah, I definitely am. Listen, if you did, just give me a holler. Say, I'm here. What's up? Peace and blessings. Just put it down there in the chat or however you message. Yes. I want to give thanks to Wakanda, and I count it an honor to be given this opportunity to share revelation knowledge. I've been passed the baton to run the third leg of this 4-week Black History series. The first leg was a stellar start by Dr. Jerome Crichton as he surgically analyzed and synthesized the aspects of white pathology and its impact on the minds and souls of Black folk, particularly in the religious realm. The baton was given for the second leg into the capable hands of Claudia Marion Allen, as her incredible gift of storytelling deposited insight and inspiration into us to keep us going on this tedious journey. Well, we're in the third leg now, and I'll do my best not to drop the baton, and I'll try to deliver it safely into the hands of the anchor leg. In my teaching this evening, I want to posit 3 points. Unfortunately, each point will not begin with the same letter of the alphabet. The title of this revelation is the same as my 3 points. Black, period. Like, period. Me, period. That's the title and the 3 points. Black, like, me. Point number 1, Black. In 1961, a nonfiction book entitled Black Like Me was published by a white journalist from Texas named John Howard Griffin. And he recounted his journey into the Deep South at that time when African Americans lived under racial oppression and segregation. And for his project, Griffin used theatrical makeup to temporarily pass as a Black man as he traveled through the South in 1959 to see life and segregation from the other side of the color line. He published his series, first of all, through articles of his experience in the Sepia magazine, which was the underwriter of his project. And then he went on to publish a full account of Black Like Me in 1961. And it was later adapted in 1964 as a movie of the same name. But of course, he flipped back into a full-fledged white man when the project was over, which means he wasn't really Black. It was just a project, and he ended up profiting from it. A Black-faced white man cannot mimic Black experiences. You've got to be in the skin we're in and live the same history of trauma and oppression. In short, you can't fake black. You gotta be black. Conversely, a deeper dominating pathology is whiteness. Now, let me be absolutely clear right here so none of you miss it, so none of you get it twisted. Truth is never against people. Truth is against error. It's against principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. Truth is against false systems and institutions and constructs. The construct of whiteness refers to a racialized identity that is obsessed with power, and it strategically functions as a standard by which all other groups are compared to and controlled. Whiteness, normalized via its culture and customs and belief, sees blacks as inferior and to ensure their hegemony and dominance. Whiteness is responsible for, get this, creating the conditions that blacks must operate within so that they maintain their so-called inferiority and abnormality. Arguably, the latest definition of black trauma is 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I wish I could pause that long for us to realize the length of the life being crushed out of George Floyd. That's the latest definition of black trauma, in my estimation. Sister Alicia Garza, who is one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, offers some insight in her recent book that I'm reading, The Purpose of Power. She says this, and I quote, "If there were no black people, there would be no white people. Whiteness depends on blackness to survive. Whiteness as a valued identity would not exist if there wasn't blackness, an identity that has been associated with violence, crime, and dysfunction," unquote. That's deep. In this country, black is the greatest threat to whiteness in the bedroom and the boardroom. Yeah. So when we distill this social onslaught of whiteness down to its root, we find that it is encased in the sick Freudian concept of penis envy. And it operates subliminally, coupled with what Dr. Frances Cress Welsing taught us when she told us that whites have a fear of genetic annihilation. Why do you think castrating black males was such an obsession? Why do you think the genocide of black populations continue throughout all these generations? See, my first of 3 points is simply black. And black is the most dangerous threat to whiteness on many levels. Consequently, whiteness was weaponized in many nefarious forms of white supremacy global domination. To counter black by any means necessary. Point number 2. Elder Neely Fuller Jr., who was the respected mentor of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, who was a powerful black woman psychiatrist based here where I am in Washington, D.C. She's now an ancestor, going on 2 years since she's passed. But Elder Neely Fuller taught her and taught us about what he called the 9 areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, law, media, politics, sex, which is family, religion, and war. And how these 9 areas of people activity, or these 9 institutions, which continue to this very day, have been and continue to be functionaries of white supremacy. My spotlight this evening is only on religion. So in this country, and even in the Black diaspora, religion is a foundational functionary of white supremacy, or whiteness, if you will. Consequently, Christianity's most successful weapon of whiteness has been and continues to be the white Christ. That's it, the white Christ. It's no secret that the image of the Black Madonna and the woolly-haired Black Christ child had historical prominence, like Black folk, in our image and in likeness. And just as Adama was made in the image and likeness of his and her creator, you see, both of their names was Adama. That's what Elohim, the creator, named them both. The creator never called her Eve. She was Adama, woman, just as he was Adama, man. But just as Adama was created in the image and likeness of his and her creator, the incarnated creator was made in the image and likeness of Adama. Yet I saw whiteness in its calculated context and construct when my family and I walked into the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican in Rome during our Mediterranean cruise tour. I saw how Michelangelo, under the threat of Pope Julius II, as our tour guide told us. In fact, she worked at the Vatican, but she was off on that Tuesday, and she consented to be our tour guide. But she told us that Michelangelo was threatened by Pope Julius II. He says, I can't paint this. He says, I'm a sculptor, not a painter, but Pope Julius threatened his life. And so for 4+ years, Michelangelo laid on his back on a scaffold as he replaced the truth of a Black Christ with a white Christ. He made a forgery of an image. The heavenly host were painted white. Whitewashed, whiteness. But here's the truth. Here's the facts. Yeshua Messiah, Christ, was African. Christ's birth was in an African family. Christ's ancestry was African, not European. His ancestors, Abraham, David, Moses, Rahab, Ruth, and his mother Mary were African. Christ's prophecies that he studied were from African prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and other African Hebraic prophets. Christ spoke an African language, Hebrew and Aramaic. That was his language on earth. Hebrew is an African language, and Aramaic is a dialect of Hebrew, just like patois is a dialect. In fact, Yahweh's introduction to Moses in Exodus 3 at the burning bush was in Hebrew, an African language. The name Yahweh means I am that I am is Hebrew. It is an African language. The 10 Commandments were written by the finger of Yahweh in Hebrew, an African language. How do we know that? The Ugaritic tables that was unearthed during an excavation in 1929 said this, and I quote, "Hebrew is the lip of the Canaanites." We know the Canaanites were descendants of Ham. They were African people. Lip means language. Hebrew is even said to be the first language in the African Edenic garden. Adamah is Hebrew. That name for man and woman, which means soil or earth that they were created from. Genesis 14:13 says that Abram was Hebrew. They called him Abram the Hebrew. That's the truth. Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, in her book, The Black Christ, teaches, and I'm quoting, the white Christ characteristically allowed for, number one, the justification of slavery. Number two, blacks to be slaves. And number three, the compatibility of Christianity with the extreme conservatism of social and political cruelty to blacks and people of color. The white Christ is the center of slave-holding Christianity, unquote. So I'm bound to say this, that any religion that perpetuates a white Christ lie by failing to revise their theology, change their church stained glass, delete the white Christ image from their official periodicals is perpetrating a continuum of slave-holding Christianity. And for black adherents, hear me, and for black adherents to turn a blind eye to white supremacy religious culture in organizations where blacks are affiliated with and put their money into must be honestly reevaluated and critically assess our mental and emotional health and well-being. Yeah, I said it. Through covert and overt and calculated means of whiteness, it is transferred through three things: indoctrination, internalization, and institutionalization. That's what whiteness is transferred in the religious realm, in the Christian, the slave-holding Christian realm to blacks. It is through indoctrination, internalization, and institutionalization. These three are the identifying marks that associate and assimilate blacks into whiteness, no matter what white institution. However, I'm referring to religious institutions right now. It happens. It happened to me, being conditioned from childhood, growing up in a white-run church of an all-black congregation. Listen, when Dr. Skip Gates was on PBS, was airing the history of the Black church.
You froze.
I was looking at Facebook and looking at some of the chats, looking at some of the comments in the chats, and I saw when an individual said, I feel kind of left out. I think we're left out. Giving the thought that the Adventist church, Black Adventist, was left out of his particular offering. Well, there's no question why Black Adventists were left out. And that is because Black Adventism is a part of a white-run church. Go back and think about back in the day when Ebony always had once a year a series of the 50 top Black preachers. You never saw an Adventist preacher on the cover or in those pages or whatever. You see, by 1919, 90% of Blacks in America were in the 7 largest Black denominations, AME, Pentecostal, and so forth. Only 10% of Blacks join white-run denominations. Therefore, Black Adventists are in the 10th percentile of a white denomination. Black Adventists are not in a Black church, even with regional conferences, even with Black institutions and organizations. Therefore, Black Adventism or the Adventist church would not be in this Black church offering that was presented by Dr. Skip Gates. But back to my point, and that is that the indoctrination and the internalization and the institutionalization are identifying marks of the assimilations of Blacks into whiteness or white-run institutions. It's subtle, but as I said, I was conditioned from childhood growing up in a white-run church in an all-Black congregation. So I'll cite a few actions and attitudes that reveal the subtle but visible transference of whiteness to the Black souls and minds of Blacks in membership and affiliation with white-run, slave-holding Christianity. For one, the indoctrination and internalization of whiteness is evident when Black folks sing with gusto, whiter than snow. Now wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. Really? Or how about this one? Oh, precious is that flow that makes me white as snow. No other fount I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus. For real? That outcome ain't even scriptural. But they are the continuum of a slave-holding Christianity represented by a white Christ, with Black folk singing those songs. But it exposes, and maybe for some mostly unconscious, yet a successful indoctrination and internalization of whiteness. And every Black believer needs to be in recovery from white hermeneutical abuse. In fact, next time, sing it like this. Oh, precious is that flow that makes me black and glow. No other fount I know, nothing but the blood of Jesus. There are so many manifestations of the indoctrination and the internalization of whiteness that impact Blacks in numerous ways. But it is my belief that the greatest degree of transference of whiteness is sadly evidenced in the institutionalization of whiteness in Black adherents. Indoctrination is dangerous, yeah. But internalization is worse. There were people who were enslaved on plantations who acquiesced to the slaveholder, not slave master. They're not our masters. They're slave holders. They were slave holders. But there were Blacks on the plantation that acquiesced and assimilated to plantation life. They didn't buck. They didn't resist. They just accommodated it. They became normalized in it. And that means they became institutionalized. There's a sad, sad spot in my memory as I think about the time that I was invited to present for an AY program during Black History Month in a Black congregation who was a part of a white-run denomination. The host didn't give me a topic, and so I presented a PowerPoint presentation on the African ancestry of Yeshua, of Christ. A little while after I'd gotten into my presentation, a sister stood up in the congregation and started yelling at me. It doesn't matter what color Jesus is. It doesn't matter what his ancestry was. All that matters is he is our Savior. Then another person stood up and started yelling at me, and another person. So I sat down. My host was upset, and she stood up and chided the people how disrespectful they were to her guest. And she asked me to continue. So as I continued my truth telling, somebody else stood up and started yelling over top of me. It doesn't matter what color he is. And another person and another person. So I sat down again. And I told my host, I'm done. Man, that sister could have spit nails. She was so embarrassed and angry. But she asked me, did I have any final words to say? I stood up and I looked around at the congregation. And then I said, you say that it doesn't matter what color Christ is or what his ancestry is. My only question to you is, but does the truth matter? I packed up and picked up and pulled up. But I will never forget that experience. But what it said to me is that institutionalization, that's almost like a prison mindset. It's like a prison mindset when a person can't function outside of that particular environment or mindset. And so there is indoctrination into whiteness and internalization of whiteness through the white Christ. But the institutionalization has been the most successful when the truth telling of the white Christ of a slave-holding Christianity is brought up, or the need for Black religious leadership in white-run religious organizations to stand up and speak out against whiteness in all its forms. Speak truth to power, as well as truth to the powerless. But because of institutionalization, many Blacks will either become, get this, crickets, like after this presentation, or apologists to defend whiteness, or hypervigilant, as my friend Dr. Jerome Crichton adeptly elucidates on that, protecting the anxiety of whites and modifying their Black behaviors. Hypervigilant, or because they're fearful of sovereignty as it pertains to white-run organizations and institutions that they are affiliated with or employed with that still perpetuate whiteness and the white images of Christ in their current periodicals. And something is wrong when parents have to give their children brown crayons to color the face of Christ. But deeper still, some of them will turn on the truth tellers. As Paulo Freire posits in his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where he says, and I'm talking about the institutionalization of whiteness in Blacks. He says that not only do the oppressed begin to assimilate the ideas of their oppressors, but they begin to see the oppressor in one another. Wow. You'll hear, we can hear the institutionalization, the lockdown of whiteness in many Blacks that defend in all eloquence a slave-holding Christianity perpetrated through politics, protocol, policies, practices, patriarchy. Blacks will defend it because of institutionalization. That's sad. But finally, me, Black, whiteness's greatest fear is Black. Greatest assaults against Black, historically and currently, who were made in the image and likeness of their Creator on the continent of Africa, not Europe. Like What a fear to see someone like the image of a historical Christ. And the assaults to dominate and control last point is me. I'll be very honest with you. There is a generation of Black millennials, Gens X, Y, and Z, who ain't going for the okie doke. They're not riding and dying with a white Christ, slave holding Christianity. They're not going to do it. And if they're not going to do it, and they have association and affiliation and membership, you better believe blacks in the village ain't rolling out with that. Now, it's very interesting because the gospel of Christ is primarily approached from his good side. Understand what I'm saying? The side of grace and mercy and forgiveness and love. See, that's what whiteness purports through a white Christ. But if many of us are honest, that is not connecting with the village. In fact, somebody asked James Baldwin in 1955, is the black church dead? I'm quoting him. He said, let me rephrase that. Any organization that has problems attracting its youth, its existence is at least debatable. Come on, be honest. It's a struggle to get youth, young adults, to become a part of the fellowship, especially conscious, discerning black young people, young adults, and millennials. They're not connecting with that side. I like how Dr. Paul Conniff referred to the other side of the gospel. That's kind of what he referred to. There's another side of the gospel. I personally call it his wounded side. And that's where we really have to consider connecting the black village. Not to the good side, the whiteness side, but the me side, who goes through and went through things like me, who understands what it means to be born of a teenage mother. See, that's on the wounded side. See, we understand the wounded side. The village understands the wounded side. You can imagine the ridicule and disbelief that she went through for months. Yeah, she ain't made no virgin hands. hiding mouths as smirks are said about her as she walks by. Teen mother. Yeah, I knew she was fast. That's the wounded side. Born in a manger. Dr. James Cone said that's like being born in a shed in the ghetto. The wounded side. The wounded side that knows poverty. The wounded side that knows abuse. Growing up, the wounded side that knows name calling and labeling. The wounded side that knows police brutality. The wounded side that was lynched on a tree. The village can connect with his wounded side better than his good side. Mm-hmm. They can connect. They can see that he was black like me. They can identify. And then they can be instructed that because of that wounded side of the gospel, these are the results. With his stripes, you and I can be healed. Christ was black like me. Not only in ancestry, but in experience to understand oppression and trauma. It was the cross that showed us a black Christ. I'm done. Beware. Beware of indoctrination, internalization, and institutionalization. Beware of defending the indefensible. Beware of those who continue to reshuffle the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. Where there is life, there is hope, and hands that help are holier than lips that pray.